Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you will uncover lost teachings that Zen masters have passed down through generations to calm the storms of the mind and unlock profound, meaningful rest. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I am going to share a curated collection of eye-opening Zen stories and Buddhist tales, each holding a key to the hidden secrets of mental clarity and emotional freedom. Every story carries a transformative insight that can reshape your entire experience of stress, worry, and the endless chatter of the mind. These are more than simple bedtime stories. They are potent, living teachings from masters who grasped a truth many of us have overlooked: that true peace arises not from altering our external world, but from transforming our inner one. As the Zen saying goes, the quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. Throughout our time together, you will see just how deeply this ancient wisdom can change your life. As we travel through these timeless narratives, you will feel a powerful shift begin to occur. The grip of anxiety will soften. The volume of your thoughts will diminish. You will find yourself naturally drifting into a state of deep understanding and serene rest. So, settle in now. Let your body release into the surface beneath you. Take one deliberate breath with me. And as you let it go, know that you are ready to receive the insights that have been waiting for you for a long time. Let us now explore a story about the inherent worth that exists in all things. This is the value of a weed. In a small monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived a master renowned not for his eloquent sermons or grand ceremonies, but for his extraordinary garden. Visitors would travel from distant provinces to witness this wonder, expecting perhaps to find rare orchids from distant mountains or perfectly sculpted bonsai trees arranged in meticulous patterns. Instead, they discovered something far more remarkable: a vast and vibrant space that seemed to pulse with life itself. The garden was a chaotic symphony of growth. Vegetables mingled freely with flowering herbs, wild grasses danced alongside cultivated roses, and what most people would hastily dismiss as weeds thrived in abundant profusion. Dandelions burst golden between the monastery steps, clover carpeted the pathways, and burdock stood tall among the meditation stones. To the untrained eye, it appeared almost neglected, yet there was an undeniable sense of perfect harmony that settled over anyone who entered. One morning, as the master knelt among his plants with dirt-stained hands and a serene expression, a young student approached with eager anticipation. The student had arrived at the monastery just days before, burning with desire to understand the deeper mysteries of existence. His mind was sharp, his dedication fierce, and his need for meaningful work intense. "Master," the student said, bowing deeply with the reverence due to one so wise, "I wish to understand the true nature of things. Please give me a task that will open my understanding." The master straightened slowly, his back aching slightly from his morning labors. His weathered hands brushed soil from his simple robes as he regarded the earnest young seeker with eyes that held both gentleness and unmistakable depth. "A task, you say?" the master replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of one who had spent decades in contemplation. "Very well. Go into this garden and bring me one plant that has no purpose. The student's eyes lit up with determination. Here was a concrete challenge, something he could sink his teeth into. He accepted the task with vigor, certain that his keen observation and analytical mind would serve him well. How difficult could it be to find a useless plant in such an apparently wild and unmanaged space? He began his search immediately, moving methodically through the garden rows. He examined the fragrant lavender bushes and quickly recalled their use for oils, perfumes, and calming teas. He studied the sturdy burdock plants and remembered that their roots were prized in traditional medicine for purifying the blood. Even the humble dandelions, those most despised of weeds, revealed their purpose as he observed bees gathering nectar from their bright faces and recalled that their leaves could be eaten as nutritious greens. As the hours passed, the student's confidence began to waver. He crawled on his hands and knees, peering at the tiniest specimens. The small clovers that most gardeners would eliminate without thought, he discovered, were fixing nitrogen in the soil, enriching it for all the surrounding plants. Even when he found aphids clustered on a rose stem, preparing to condemn them as destructive pests, he witnessed a bright red ladybug arrive to feast upon them, revealing their role in the intricate web of life. The sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows as his search grew more desperate. Every moss, every grass blade, every seemingly insignificant sprout revealed itself to have some function, some gift to offer to the greater whole. Some provided food for insects, others prevented erosion, still others served as natural pest deterrents or soil conditioners. As evening approached and long shadows stretched across the garden, the student returned to his master, empty-handed. His clothes were dirty, his pride humbled, and his face streaked with both soil and the sweat of honest effort. "Master," he said, bowing even lower than before, his voice heavy with what he believed was failure. "I have failed in my task. I spent the entire day searching with great care, but I could not find a single plant, not even the smallest weed or blade of grass that did not have its purpose." The master looked up from his evening watering, and a deep, knowing smile spread across his weathered features, reaching all the way to his eyes. "You have not failed," he said gently, turning back to tend a patch of what others might call mere weeds. "You have completed the task perfectly." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with thoughts of hatred. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound lesson hidden within the student's day in the garden. What we often dismiss, judge, or seek to eliminate may carry hidden value that only patient attention can reveal. Why do we so readily label certain things as worthless? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned habit of categorization, the mind's tendency to divide the world into useful and useless, beautiful and ugly, wanted and unwanted. This discriminating consciousness, while helpful for basic survival, becomes a barrier to deeper understanding when applied indiscriminately to the rich complexity of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you make instant judgments about worth and value. The person who cuts you off in traffic becomes a terrible driver. The co-worker who doesn't greet you warmly becomes unfriendly. The unexpected delay in your schedule becomes a waste of time. Like the student initially searching for a useless plant, we scan our environment looking for what doesn't belong, what should be eliminated, what has no right to exist as it is. Yet Zen practice invites us to look more deeply, to cultivate what Suzuki Roshi called "don't know mind." This is the quality of open awareness that approaches each moment, each encounter, each apparent problem with fresh eyes, curious about what purpose might be hidden within what appears purposeless. In modern life, we encounter many weeds that might actually serve essential functions if we could see clearly. The difficult colleague who challenges our assumptions. The traffic delay that forces us to slow down when we desperately needed rest. The financial setback that reveals our unhealthy relationship with security. The illness that teaches us to value our health. Even our own perceived flaws and limitations often serve purposes we cannot initially comprehend. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck observed, "Every moment is the teacher." This includes the moments we would prefer to pull up and discard like weeds. The Master's Garden demonstrates that in nature there are no mistakes, no accidents, no purposeless growth. Everything exists in relationship, serving the health of the whole in ways that may not be immediately apparent to limited human perception. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. When we stop dividing our experience into categories of worth and worthlessness, we begin to live more fully, love more inclusively, and let go more easily of the need to control and judge. Tonight, as you review the events of your day, can you identify the weeds you encountered? What irritations, interruptions, or unwanted experiences might carry hidden gifts if approached with the student's patient attention? Perhaps that moment of frustration contains a lesson about acceptance. Perhaps that person who annoyed you offers a mirror for seeing your own unconscious patterns. As the Buddha taught, every morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. In tomorrow's garden of experience, may you discover the inherent purpose dwelling even in what appears purposeless, remembering that in the ecology of existence, everything belongs. Our next story reveals the profound difference between force and nurture in the unfolding of greatness. This is the abbot's rooster. High in the mountains, where morning mist clung to ancient peaks, and the air itself seemed to whisper of timeless wisdom, there stood a monastery renowned throughout the land. Travelers spoke of many wonders found within its walls, the profound teachings of its abbot, the disciplined practice of its monks, the peaceful gardens that seemed to heal troubled hearts, and perhaps most surprisingly, its magnificent rooster. This was no ordinary bird. The rooster was a creature of such remarkable bearing that visitors would stop mid-conversation simply to witness his presence. His feathers caught the morning light like polished copper and emerald, shimmering with an iridescence that seemed almost supernatural. When he crowed at dawn, his voice carried across the valley with such authority and pure resonance that even the most skeptical visitors felt something stirring in their hearts, as if the very sound announced not just the coming of day, but the eternal renewal of life itself. His posture spoke of innate dignity. He moved through the monastery courtyard with a confidence that was neither arrogant nor timid, but simply authentic. Other birds seemed to respect his presence, and even the monastery cats maintained a respectful distance. There was something almost regal about his bearing, yet also perfectly natural, as if he embodied exactly what a rooster was meant to be. One autumn morning, a wealthy patron of many temples arrived for his annual visit with the abbot. This dignitary was a man accustomed to the finest things in life. He had seen champion horses in imperial stables, prized hawks trained for nobility, and exotic birds from distant lands kept in elaborate cages. Yet when he glimpsed the monastery's rooster pecking contentedly in the courtyard, he was immediately captivated. After the formal discussions of philosophy and the monastery's financial needs had concluded, the dignitary found his curiosity too strong to contain. As he and the abbot sat in the simple tea room overlooking the courtyard, he leaned forward with obvious excitement. "Venerable abbot," he said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of a true connoisseur, "I have traveled extensively and seen champion birds throughout the empire, but none compare to yours. You must be a master of animal training. Tell me, what is your secret? What special techniques do you use to discipline such a magnificent creature? How do you develop such bearing, such presence?" The old abbot, who had been sipping his tea with the unhurried attention of one who had learned to find perfection in simple moments, placed his cup down gently on the low wooden table. Rather than responding immediately, he gazed out the window toward the courtyard where the rooster was going about his daily business with calm purpose. "I do not train him," the abbot replied softly, his voice carrying no trace of false modesty, only simple truth. The dignitary's eyebrows raised in confusion. Surely the abbot was being humble, deflecting praise in the manner of truly wise teachers. "But venerable one," he pressed, his magnificent posture, his powerful crow that echoes across the valley, his almost noble bearing, surely these are the results of careful conditioning and rigorous training methods. "No," the abbot said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth like sunlight on still water. "I do not train him. I simply provide the best grain I can find and fresh water from the mountain spring. I ensure his coop is safe from predators and clean for his rest. I do nothing more than this." He lifted his teacup again, inhaling the steam as if it carried the essence of the mountains themselves. "The magnificence you observe is his own nature, expressing itself freely. I merely create the conditions that allow it to flourish." The Buddha observed, "What we plant in the soil of contemplation, we shall reap in the harvest of action." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the profound difference between forcing growth and providing the conditions in which natural excellence can emerge. Why do we so often believe that greatness must be imposed from outside, shaped through force or manufactured through relentless effort? Zen Buddhism reveals how this misconception stems from our deep conditioning around control and achievement. We live in a culture that worships intervention, that believes anything worthwhile requires struggle, manipulation, and the application of external pressure. Consider how this manifests in your daily experience. How often do you try to force outcomes rather than creating optimal conditions? We attempt to force confidence through positive thinking rather than cultivating genuine self-awareness. We try to force creativity through deadlines and pressure, rather than providing space and freedom for inspiration to arise. We attempt to force relationships through manipulation, rather than creating environments of trust and authenticity. In parenting, education, leadership, and even our relationship with ourselves, we often fall into the trap of believing that more intervention equals better results. Yet the abbot's rooster reveals a different path entirely. His magnificence wasn't created through training regimens or behavioral modification. It emerged naturally when his basic needs were met with care and attention. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This apparent paradox points to the same wisdom demonstrated by the abbot. True development honors what already exists while providing optimal conditions for its expression. The mountain spring water and quality grain represent more than just physical nourishment. They symbolize the fundamental requirements for any authentic flourishing: attention, respect, safety, and freedom from artificial constraints. When these conditions are present, natural excellence tends to emerge without force. This principle applies equally to human development. Children thrive not when constantly corrected and controlled, but when provided with safety, nourishment, attention, and space to explore their natural curiosity. Creative projects flourish not under micromanagement, but when given adequate resources and freedom from interference. Even our own spiritual growth unfolds more gracefully through consistent practice and patient attention rather than aggressive self-improvement campaigns. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." The abbot's approach to the rooster demonstrates this wisdom in action. He observed what actually supported the bird's well-being, rather than imposing preconceived notions about what training should look like. In Japanese gardening, there is a principle called listening to the tree, understanding the natural tendency of a plant and working with rather than against its inherent nature. The master gardener shapes through minimal intervention, allowing the essential character to express itself while providing guidance and support. Tonight, as you reflect on the areas of your life where you've been trying to force growth or change, can you identify where you might instead focus on improving conditions? Perhaps that difficult relationship needs more safety and less advice. Perhaps that creative project needs more space and less pressure. Perhaps your own inner development needs more compassion and less criticism. As the Buddha taught, everything that has a beginning has an ending. Make your peace with that, and all will be well. True mastery lies not in controlling outcomes, but in understanding what conditions allow natural excellence to unfold, then stepping back and trusting the inherent wisdom of life to express itself. Let us continue on our journey with a tale about the futility of forced effort. This is the polished tile. In a peaceful monastery where the rhythm of daily practice had continued unchanged for generations, there lived a young monk named Mazu, whose dedication had become legendary among his peers. From the earliest hours before dawn until late into the night, he could be found sitting in perfect stillness in the meditation hall, his back straight as a mountain pine, his breathing controlled with precision, his mind focused with an intensity that seemed almost fierce. Mazu had arrived at the monastery burning with a singular desire to achieve enlightenment through the sheer force of his determination. He believed, with the passionate certainty of youth, that spiritual awakening was a fortress to be conquered through relentless siege. If others meditated for an hour, he would sit for 3. If the prescribed practice was mindfulness of breath, he would add visualization techniques, mantra recitation, and analytical contemplation, until his sessions became elaborate internal gymnastics. His fellow monks watched with a mixture of admiration and concern as Mazu pushed himself beyond all reasonable limits. He would sit motionless for entire days and nights, refusing meals, ignoring the call to communal activities, his face growing gaunt and his eyes taking on the hollow intensity of someone waging war against his own mind. His meditation had become a form of spiritual violence, each session a battle where he was both the attacker and the attacked. Master Nanyue, the wise teacher who guided the monastery, observed Mazu's increasingly desperate efforts with growing worry. He recognized the signs of what Zen calls meditation sickness, the way earnest practice can become another form of ego striving. where the very effort to transcend the self becomes the self's most subtle trap. Night after night, he watched Mazu sit rigidly in the hall, his body tight with determination, his breathing forced into artificial patterns, his natural awareness twisted into knots of concentration. One crisp morning, as golden light filtered through the monastery windows and birds announced the arrival of another day, Nanyue made his way to Mazu's usual meditation spot. The young monk was already there, of course, having not moved from the previous evening. His posture was perfect, his stillness complete, yet there was something deeply unnatural about his presence, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Nanyue settled himself on a cushion nearby and without explanation reached into his robes and withdrew a simple clay roof tile and a rough stone. In the profound silence of the meditation hall, he began to rub the stone against the tile with slow, deliberate strokes. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound was jarring in the sacred space. At first, Mazu tried to maintain his focus, treating the noise as just another distraction to be overcome through superior concentration. He tightened his attention, clenched his jaw slightly, and attempted to push the grating sound out of his awareness through sheer mental force. But the scraping continued, patient and persistent. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sound seemed to grow louder, more invasive, impossible to ignore. Finally, Mazu's carefully constructed concentration cracked like an eggshell. He opened his eyes, and despite his training and respectful behavior, a hint of irritation colored his voice. "Revered master, what are you doing?" Nanyue continued his work without looking up, his movements as steady and purposeful as the tide. "I am polishing this tile," he replied with perfect calm. Mazu's confusion deepened. "But why, master? What is the purpose?" "I am polishing it to make a mirror," Nanyue explained, still focused on his task. For a moment, Mazu forgot his role as a respectful student. A short, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. "Master, forgive me, but that is impossible. You can never make a mirror by polishing a clay tile. It is just a piece of earth. No amount of rubbing will change its fundamental nature." Only then did Nanyue stop his scraping and turn to look directly into Mazu's eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the gentle firmness of absolute truth. "And you," he said quietly, "can never achieve enlightenment by tormenting your mind in meditation. It is just a mind. How can you turn it into something it is not through force?" The words hit Mazu like thunder in a clear sky. In that instant, he understood that his months of intense effort had been as futile as polishing clay to create a mirror. His striving itself was the obstacle. His determination to achieve some special state was preventing him from recognizing the natural awareness that had been present all along. For the first time in months, Mazu let go. The rigid tension in his shoulders dissolved. His breathing became natural and easy. His mind, released from the burden of trying to become enlightened, simply settled into its own peaceful nature. He sat there in wonder, not because he had achieved some extraordinary state, but because he had stopped trying to achieve anything at all. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the very seeking is the barrier. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the paradoxical nature of spiritual effort and the way our most sincere attempts to force awakening can become the very obstacles that keep us from recognizing what we already are. Why do we fall so easily into the trap of spiritual force? Zen Buddhism explains that this tendency arises from our deeply conditioned belief that anything worthwhile must be earned through effort, struggle, and the application of willpower. We approach meditation and spiritual practice with the same mentality we bring to learning a skill or building a career. The assumption that more effort equals better results. This misunderstanding reflects what Buddhism calls gaining mind, the mental orientation that sees enlightenment as an object to be acquired rather than recognizing the natural awareness that is already present. Like Mazu, we often turn our practice into a form of subtle violence against our own nature, trying to force our minds into artificial states rather than learning to rest in the simplicity of what is. Consider how this pattern manifests in your own life. How often do you try to force peace by controlling your thoughts? Attempt to manufacture confidence through positive self-talk. Try to create love by manipulating your feelings. The harder we grasp for these states, the more elusive they become, like trying to catch your own shadow or hold water in a clenched fist. In meditation, we may find ourselves straining for special experiences, judging our practice based on whether thoughts arise or disappear, forcing our breath into artificial patterns, or becoming frustrated when awareness doesn't feel clear enough. Each of these efforts is another form of polishing the tile, trying to make our ordinary mind into something extraordinary through force. Zen teacher Brad Warner writes, "Enlightenment is not a state you enter. It's the absence of something. What we're absent from is the very striving that seeks enlightenment. When we stop trying to make our minds into mirrors, we discover that awareness itself has always been naturally clear." The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." This teaching points to the fundamental misdirection in our approach. We seek peace as if it were a destination to reach, rather than recognizing it as our natural state when we stop disturbing ourselves with excessive effort. This doesn't mean spiritual practice is unnecessary. Like the abbot providing conditions for his rooster's natural magnificence, authentic practice creates the environment in which our inherent wisdom can express itself. The difference lies in approaching practice as a form of gentle cultivation rather than forceful intervention. Tonight, as you notice your mind trying to achieve some particular state or force some outcome, can you remember Mazu's moment of letting go? What happens when you stop polishing the tile of your experience and simply rest in the natural awareness that needs no improvement? Perhaps you'll discover that what you've been seeking through effort has been quietly present all along, waiting not to be created, but simply to be noticed. As the Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." The mirror you seek is not created through polishing, but revealed by stopping the very effort to create it. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the impossible choices that reveal our deepest assumptions about duty and survival. This is the man hanging from a branch. In the monastery's teaching hall, as afternoon shadows grew long and the air itself seemed to deepen with contemplation, Master Kyogen prepared to present his students with a teaching that would challenge everything they thought they understood about wisdom, compassion, and the very nature of spiritual responsibility. The assembled monks sat in perfect rows, their attention sharp as mountain air, ready to receive whatever profound discourse their teacher might offer. Kyogen was known throughout the region for his ability to present the most complex spiritual truths through deceptively simple scenarios. His teachings had a way of bypassing the analytical mind and striking directly at the heart of understanding. today, he sensed his students needed to confront something deeper than mere concepts. They needed to face the fundamental contradictions inherent in conscious living. "Imagine a man," Kyogen began, his voice carrying the authority of one who had wrestled with life's deepest questions and emerged with hard-won wisdom. As he spoke, his words painted such a vivid picture that each monk could see the scenario unfolding before their inner eye. This man is climbing a tall, ancient tree that grows at the edge of a sheer cliff. The tree is old and gnarled, its bark rough beneath his hands, its branches thick but unpredictable. He has climbed high, perhaps seeking birds' eggs, perhaps simply for the joy of reaching toward the sky. But suddenly, without warning, his foot slips on the weathered bark. The monks listened with complete absorption, their own breathing seeming to synchronize with the imagined drama. Some unconsciously tightened their jaw muscles, feeling the sympathetic tension of the precarious situation. "He falls," Kyogen continued, his voice carrying the weight of gravity itself. "The earth rushes up toward him. The rocks below promise certain death. But at the very last moment, in a desperate attempt to save himself, he manages to bite down hard on a high branch. He is now hanging suspended over a great drop, his entire weight supported only by his teeth clenched around this rough piece of wood." The master paused, allowing the image to settle fully in their minds. The terror, the desperation, the impossible strain of such a position. "His hands cannot find any purchase on the smooth branch above his head," Kyogen went on. "His arms swing uselessly in the air. His feet dangle far from the trunk, unable to find any foothold on the sheer bark below. The branch bends slightly under his weight, creaking ominously. He is completely helpless, suspended between life and death by nothing more than the strength of his bite." By now, several monks were unconsciously working their own jaws, their teeth clenched in sympathetic tension. The scenario felt so real, they could almost taste the bark, feel the desperate strain in their neck muscles. "Now," Master Kyogen said, his voice taking on an edge that commanded complete attention. "While this man hangs in such desperate circumstances, someone happens to walk by at the bottom of the tree. This person looks up, sees the man's predicament, and calls out to him, 'Friend, you seem to be in a difficult position. Please, can you tell me what is the fundamental principle of Zen?' The master let this impossible scenario sink in fully before continuing. "Here is the man's dilemma," Kyogen said, his gaze moving slowly across each face in the assembly. "If he does not answer the question, he fails in his duty as one who has received the teachings. He fails to offer help to a sincere seeker. He fails to share the truth that could benefit another being. But if he opens his mouth to give an answer, any answer, he will immediately plunge to his death on the rocks below." The silence in the hall was profound, charged with the electricity of minds encountering an unsolvable paradox. "What must he do?" Kyogen asked finally. In that position, hanging by his teeth between life and death, faced with the choice between spiritual duty and physical survival, what is the correct response? The monks sat in deep, perplexed silence. Each one found himself hanging from that branch in his own mind, feeling the impossible weight of the choice. Some tried to find clever solutions. Perhaps he could write the answer in the dirt below, or gesture meaningfully. But each potential escape seemed to miss the essential point of the teaching. The Buddha understood that the truth is not always beautiful, nor beautiful words the truth. This tale unveils one of Zen's most penetrating insights into the nature of spiritual authenticity and the moments when our deepest values come into direct conflict with our most basic survival instincts. Why does this story create such a profound sense of unease? The deeper teaching here shows us that genuine spiritual maturity often requires us to transcend the very framework that creates impossible choices. The man hanging from the branch represents our human condition, caught between competing demands, forced to choose between values we hold equally dear. Look deeply at your own experience. How often do you find yourself suspended between impossible choices? The employee who witnesses corruption but fears losing their job if they speak up. The parent who must choose between career advancement and time with their children. The person caring for an aging relative while trying to maintain their own health and relationships. Like the man on the branch, we often feel forced to choose between our spiritual values and our practical survival. Zen Master Yunmen taught, "The world is vast and wide. Why do you put on your 7-panel robe at the sound of a bell?" This seemingly unrelated question points to the same paradox. We often trap ourselves in artificial, either-or scenarios, when the real answer lies in transcending the very assumptions that create the dilemma. The conventional mind approaches the hanging man's predicament by trying to solve it within its given parameters. But Zen wisdom suggests that the most profound response often involves stepping outside the framework entirely. What if the question itself is based on false premises? What if the very assumption that he must choose between speaking and surviving reflects a limited understanding of what true teaching actually requires? Consider how this applies to modern spiritual life. We often create false dichotomies between being spiritual and being practical, between compassion and self-care, between accepting reality and working for change. These apparent contradictions usually dissolve when we question the underlying assumptions that make them seem mutually exclusive. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Perhaps the man hanging from the branch offers the most profound teaching precisely by not speaking, demonstrating through his predicament the very nature of human suffering and attachment. His silence might communicate more about Zen than any verbal explanation could convey. In some versions of this koan, the response given is that the man should simply let go. Not just let go of the branch, but let go of the entire conceptual framework that creates the dilemma. When we stop grasping so tightly to our ideas about what we should do, what others expect of us, and what constitutes proper spiritual behavior, we often discover freedom in the very situation that seemed to trap us. Tonight, as you encounter your own impossible choices and competing demands, can you remember the man hanging from the branch? What happens when you stop trying to solve every dilemma within its apparent parameters and instead question the assumptions that make it seem unsolvable? Perhaps you'll discover that the very situation you thought was trapping you is actually offering a doorway to greater freedom. As the Buddha taught, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. Sometimes the most profound spiritual response is recognizing that the question itself arises from a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature and circumstances. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the most eloquent teaching of all. This is the Silent Sermon. In the Grand Monastery of Master Tongshan, a day of great significance was approaching. The community was preparing to commemorate the passing of their beloved founder, a master whose wisdom had guided countless souls toward enlightenment over the decades. Monks had spent weeks preparing the main hall, polishing the wooden floors until they gleamed like mirrors, arranging flowers with the precise attention that honored both beauty and impermanence, and setting out cushions for what they expected would be the largest gathering the monastery had seen in years. Word of the commemorative ceremony had spread throughout the surrounding valleys and beyond. Monks from distant temples had made long pilgrimages to be present. Lay people from villages far and wide had planned their journeys months in advance, some walking for days along mountain paths to reach the monastery in time. Scholars of Buddhist philosophy had traveled from the capital, eager to hear what profound discourse the renowned master Tung Shan would deliver in honor of such an auspicious occasion. The atmosphere in the weeks leading up to the ceremony was electric with anticipation. In the markets and tea houses, people speculated about what teaching the master might share. Would he speak of the founder's most memorable insights? Would he reveal some previously unshared wisdom that had been passed down through the lineage? The very air seemed to hum with expectant energy. On the morning of the ceremony, the main hall filled beyond capacity. Monks in their simple robes sat in perfect rows, their faces radiating the quiet joy of devotion. Elderly lay people who had known the founder personally sat with tears of remembrance already glistening in their eyes. Young seekers who had only heard stories of the founder's compassion leaned forward eagerly, ready to receive whatever wisdom would flow from their master's lips. The hall fell into profound silence as the ceremonial bell was struck, its deep resonance seeming to reach into every corner of the vast space and every corner of every heart present. Then Master Tung Shan entered, his movements embodying the grace that comes from decades of mindful practice. His simple robes seemed to flow like water as he made his way slowly to the teaching platform, his presence commanding not through force, but through the unmistakable authority of one who had touched the deepest truths of existence. The assembled crowd held its collective breath, ready to receive the master's words. Notebooks were prepared, minds were focused, hearts were opened. This was the moment they had all traveled so far to experience. Tung Shan reached the platform and paused, his gaze slowly moving across the sea of expectant faces. But he did not speak. Instead, with the same deliberate grace that had marked his entrance, he walked to a simple ceramic vase that had been placed on a small table as part of the hall's decoration. In the vase stood a single branch, not a flowering branch heavy with blossoms, not an evergreen sprig symbolizing eternal life, but a plain, withered branch that most would consider suitable only for the fire. With infinite care, the master lifted the branch from the vase. He held it before the assembly, turning it slowly so that everyone present could see it clearly from all angles. The branch was utterly ordinary, brittle, gnarled, stripped of leaves by time and weather. Its bark was grey and cracked, its surface rough with the marks of wind and rain. There was nothing beautiful about it in any conventional sense, nothing that would make someone pause to admire it in a forest. Yet as Tung Shan held it, something extraordinary happened. The branch seemed to become luminous with significance. His presence, his attention, his profound stillness transformed this humble piece of wood into something that spoke more eloquently than any words could express. In his hands, it became a teaching about impermanence, about finding beauty in simplicity, about the way awareness itself can reveal the sacred in the most ordinary circumstances. He held the branch for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was perhaps only a few minutes. His face was calm, compassionate, utterly present. There was no performance in his gesture, no attempt to create mystery or confusion. He was simply offering what was most essential, stripped of all elaboration and explanation. Then, with the same ceremonial attention he had used to lift it, Tongshan placed the branch back in the vase. He bowed deeply to the assembly, his bow expressing more gratitude and respect than 1,000 words of praise. Without having spoken a single syllable, he turned and walked slowly from the hall. The silence that followed was profound, but it was not the silence of confusion or disappointment. It was the silence of minds that had been touched by something beyond language, hearts that had received a transmission more direct than any verbal teaching could provide. Many in the crowd began to whisper among themselves, their voices carrying bewilderment and frustration. What did it mean? Some asked. Why did he say nothing? Others wondered aloud. We came so far to hear wisdom, and he gave us only silence. The disappointment in their voices was palpable, the sense of being somehow cheated of the profound discourse they had anticipated. But in the back of the hall, one young monk sat in perfect stillness, his understanding complete. Slowly, a single tear of recognition rolled down his cheek as he realized he had just received the most perfect teaching of his life, a teaching that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with presence, attention, and the willingness to see the sacred in what others might dismiss as worthless. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Better than 1,000 useless words is one word that brings peace." Here we discover that sometimes the most profound teachings transcend language entirely, speaking directly to the heart through presence and authentic demonstration, rather than explanation and analysis. Why do we assume that the most important truths must be expressed in words? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning around verbal communication and conceptual understanding. We live in a culture that equates intelligence with articulation, wisdom with eloquence, and teaching with the ability to explain complex ideas in sophisticated language. Yet consider how often the most meaningful moments in your life have been wordless. The silence shared with a friend who truly understands your sorrow. The wordless communion experienced while watching a sunset or holding a newborn child. The profound communication that happens through a simple touch when someone is in pain. These experiences suggest that our deepest knowing often occurs beyond the realm of language. Look at your own spiritual journey. How much of your most authentic insight has come through reading books or listening to lectures? And how much has emerged from direct experience, from moments of simple presence, from encounters with ordinary reality that suddenly revealed itself as sacred? Often, our most transformative realizations arise not from accumulating more information, but from learning to see with fresh eyes what has always been present. Zen teacher Alan Watts observed, "The real world is beyond our thoughts and ideas. We see it through the net of our desires, caught up in our desires, fears, and concepts." Master Tongshan's withered branch cut through this net entirely. By offering something completely ordinary with complete presence, he demonstrated how awareness itself transforms whatever it touches. The branch represented everything we typically overlook or dismiss: the aging process, the beauty of things past their prime, the sacred nature of decay and transformation. In a culture obsessed with youth, growth, and acquisition, the withered branch spoke eloquently of acceptance, of finding perfection in imperfection, of recognizing the Buddha nature even in what appears lifeless. In Japanese aesthetics, this principle is called wabi-sabi. the appreciation of transience and imperfection as gateways to deeper beauty. The branch embodied this teaching more completely than any philosophical discourse could convey. Its very ordinariness became extraordinary when met with the master's complete attention. The Buddha taught, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Master Tangshan's silent sermon lit thousands of candles of understanding in those who were ready to receive it, not through adding anything new, but by revealing what was already present. Tonight, as you sit in the silence after words have ended, can you feel the eloquence of wordless presence? What teachings might be available in the simple objects around you? A cup, a book, a flower, when approached with the same quality of attention that Tangshan brought to his withered branch?
Perhaps you'll discover that the most profound teachings have been speaking to you all along through the ordinary sacred reality of this moment.
As the Buddha taught, peace is the only battle worth waging. In the silence between thoughts, in the space between words, in the presence that needs no explanation, this battle is already won. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the phantoms we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years, their love deep and genuine, their companionship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grasped her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her impending departure, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided social gatherings, declined invitations, and turned away from any possibility of female companionship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed, and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Conversations led to friendship. Friendship deepened into affection. And eventually, despite his guilt and internal conflict, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears materialized. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the unmistakable figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance. It was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him, recounting in perfect detail everything that had transpired between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, reveal their most intimate exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so intense that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes. His hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and exhaustion. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "my dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his account, the master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure materialized, the man followed the master's instructions precisely. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the apparition. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked uncertain, even confused. I cannot," she stammered, and then, like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unresolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external forces, but from the phantoms we create through our own psychological patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and conditioning, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Consider how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken or standards you've failed to meet. These internalized critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners, but their power comes entirely from our own minds giving them substance. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no independent existence. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his conditioning told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her psychologically present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the phantom's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or psychological projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true, they're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's accusations felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know. What others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their validity, to challenge their authority over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these internal critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief, the moment we see them for what they truly are, not supernatural visitations, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals how deeply our ego can hide, even from ourselves. This is the story of the Prime Minister's lesson. In the grand capital of the Tang Dynasty, where golden palaces rose toward heaven and scholars debated philosophy in moonlit gardens, there lived a man of extraordinary accomplishments. The Prime Minister had earned his position through brilliance in both statecraft and military strategy, defending the empire from invaders while crafting policies that brought prosperity to millions. His name was spoken with reverence throughout the land, and his counsel was sought by the emperor himself. Yet despite his worldly success, the Prime Minister considered himself a humble student of the Buddha's teachings. Each week, he would leave behind the silk robes and ceremonial duties of his office, donning simple clothes to visit his beloved Zen master in a modest temple on the outskirts of the city. There, surrounded by weathered wooden beams and the gentle sound of wind chimes, he would sit in meditation and receive instruction like any other sincere seeker. The relationship between the two men appeared beautifully balanced. The master treated his distinguished student with neither special deference nor dismissal, and the Prime Minister seemed to approach his teacher with genuine humility and respect. To observers, it appeared that political rank had no bearing on their spiritual connection, simply a wise teacher guiding an earnest student along the path of awakening. On one particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the temple windows, the Prime Minister settled into his usual position before his master. After their customary meditation, he posed a question that had been troubling him. "Your Reverence," he began with careful formality, "I have been contemplating the nature of spiritual obstacles. Could you please explain what egotism means according to Buddhist teaching?" The transformation in the master's demeanor was startling and immediate. His face flushed deep red, his eyes flashed with apparent anger, and in a voice dripping with condescension and contempt, he snapped back harshly. "What kind of stupid question is that? Have you learned nothing in all your visits here?" The Prime Minister recoiled as if physically struck. Never had his teacher spoken to him with such disrespect. His own face grew hot with indignation. How dare this simple monk, who had never governed provinces or led armies, speak to him in such a manner? Did he not understand to whom he was speaking? The Prime Minister's jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and his entire body bristled with wounded pride and rising fury. Then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, the master's expression softened into a gentle smile. His voice returned to its usual warm, patient tone as he said quietly, "This, Your Excellency, is egotism." Buddha's wisdom reminds us the ego is a veil between humans and God. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the subtlety and persistence of our false sense of self. Even when we believe we have cultivated humility, the ego remains, waiting for the right trigger to reveal its hidden presence. Why do we struggle to see our own egotism? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego is like our own shadow, always present but rarely noticed because we're looking in the wrong direction. The ego is particularly clever at disguising itself in spiritual clothing. We can practice meditation for years, study sacred texts, and even develop genuine compassion, all while maintaining a subtle sense of spiritual superiority or specialness. The Prime Minister's ego wasn't obvious in his daily spiritual practice. He appeared humble, respectful, and sincere. But when his dignity was challenged, when his sense of status and importance was threatened, the ego erupted with full force. This is the ego's signature. It reveals itself not in our calm moments, but in our reactive ones. Consider how often throughout your day you might experience similar moments. A colleague interrupts you during a meeting, and irritation flashes through your mind. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and anger arises. Someone questions your expertise in an area you consider your specialty, and defensiveness emerges. These automatic reactions reveal the ego's constant vigilance, always ready to defend its constructed image of who we think we are. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of working with ego. We must simultaneously accept ourselves completely while remaining willing to see through our self-deceptions. The ego thrives on both self-hatred and self-aggrandizement, but it dissolves in the light of honest, compassionate self-observation. The master's skillful teaching method reveals another crucial insight. Sometimes the most effective spiritual instruction comes not through gentle guidance, but through direct confrontation with our unconscious patterns. The shock of having his dignity challenged in such an unexpected way created a moment of clarity for the Prime Minister. A sudden recognition of patterns that had been operating below the surface of his awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called ego transparency, the ability to see through our self-protective mechanisms as they arise. This doesn't mean we eliminate the ego entirely, which would be neither possible nor desirable, but rather that we develop a lighter relationship with it. We learn to recognize its voice without automatically believing its stories. Tonight, as you notice moments of defensiveness, irritation, or wounded pride arising in your interactions, can you remember the Prime Minister's lesson? Can you see these reactions not as character flaws, but as opportunities for deeper self-understanding? As the Buddha taught, you only lose what you cling to. The ego is simply another thing we cling to, a collection of stories about who we think we are. In releasing our grip on these stories, we discover the freedom that lies beyond the prison of self-importance. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the ultimate nature of spiritual truth. This is the encounter between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his devotion to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who concerned themselves only with wealth and territory, this emperor had spent years studying sacred texts, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master whose understanding transcended conventional knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invitation. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's renowned wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The emperor had prepared elaborate questions that would demonstrate both his devotion and sophisticated grasp of Buddhist doctrine. Surely such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his bearing humble, yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Venerable master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the vast hall decorated with precious statues and sacred symbols. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and devoted my life to understanding the sacred path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist doctrine?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a profound discourse that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would elaborate on the Four Noble Truths or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. His response came quietly. Vast emptiness, and not a trace of holiness. Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had misheard. Where was the elaborate explanation of Buddhist cosmology? Where were the references to sacred texts and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and dismay, "then who or what are you? If there is no sacred truth to attain, what makes you a master?" The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent accumulating spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a devout Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully constructed self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. "I do not know." With these three simple words, the master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had accumulated. The master departed as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in contemplative silence. As the Buddha observed, "Those who think they know, don't know. Those who know they don't know, know." This paradoxical teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with recognizing the limitations of conceptual thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grasping. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in acquiring enough sacred knowledge. But ultimate truth cannot be possessed or described in conventional terms. The master's declaration of vast emptiness points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, independent way our thoughts assume. Every phenomenon arises interdependently without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to embody. When the Master says there is not a trace of holiness, he's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that transcends dualistic thinking, separating sacred from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might illuminate your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, categorize, and repeat them. Yet each time we grasp, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The Emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with genuine awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless, but they had become obstacles to direct recognition of what was always present. The Master's "I do not know" represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains receptive to what is actually happening rather than filtering through preconceptions. From this mind, appropriate action arises without conceptual interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting "I don't know" feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this acknowledgement becomes a doorway to fresh perception. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing, the spaciousness that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The vast emptiness the Master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment, exactly as it is, lacking nothing. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the Venerable Abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Cao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Cao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Cho's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about perception's power to create reality. This is the tale of the eggplant in the dark. In a mountain monastery where silence was treasured, there lived a monk renowned for strict adherence to Buddhist precepts. His devotion was unwavering, his meditation exemplary, his commitment to non-violence absolute. For years, he had walked the path with careful attention to every rule, finding comfort in structure and certainty. One moonless night, returning from evening meditation, he walked slowly along the garden path to his quarters. The darkness was complete, broken only by faint outlines of familiar landmarks. He knew this path intimately, yet tonight something felt different. Suddenly, his foot came down on something soft and yielding. The object made a distinct squishing sound that pierced the quiet like a bell. The monk froze, his heart racing as his mind conjured the most likely explanation. He had stepped on an egg-bearing frog. The realization struck like a physical blow. The first precept forbids taking life, and here he was, a dedicated practitioner, having just killed a pregnant creature. Not only had he taken one life, but potentially dozens. Horror washed over him in waves. His hands trembled as he knelt in darkness, trying to determine what happened, but the night was too black to see. His mind spun with questions and recriminations. How could he have been so careless? Was this a spiritual test he had failed catastrophically? sleep became impossible. When he finally lay down, his mind churned with guilt and self-doubt. In his dreams, hundreds of frogs appeared, their eyes accusatory, demanding justice for their fallen mother and unborn siblings. They surrounded him, voices rising in condemnation that echoed through his consciousness. The monk woke repeatedly, each time remembering anew what he believed he had done. His carefully cultivated peace was shattered, replaced by torment that grew stronger with each passing hour. He questioned not only this moment, but his entire spiritual practice. As dawn broke, painting the monastery gardens in soft golden light, the monk returned to face the reality of his actions. His steps were heavy with dread as he approached the familiar path. But when morning light revealed the truth, the monk stopped in complete astonishment. There lay not the remains of a frog, but an overripe eggplant that had fallen from the monastery garden. The purple vegetable had split open when he stepped on it, creating the squishing sound that triggered his night of anguish. In that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened. The monk felt a sudden shift in understanding that went far beyond relief. For the first time in years of study, he truly grasped the teaching that there is no objective world. His entire night of suffering had been created not by external reality, but by his mind's interpretation of an ambiguous experience. Standing in the garden, looking at the harmless eggplant, the monk finally understood how to practice Zen. It wasn't about perfect adherence to rules or avoiding all error. It was about seeing clearly, without the distortions of assumption and mental elaboration. The Buddha once said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching captures what the monk discovered. Our experience of reality is largely created by mental interpretations rather than objective circumstances. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully perceptions shape emotional reality. The monk's actual experience was minimal, stepping on something soft in darkness. Everything that followed was generated entirely by his mind's interpretation of that simple sensory event. Why do we construct elaborate stories from incomplete information? Our minds evolved to make rapid assessments for survival, often filling gaps with worst-case scenarios. This mental habit served our ancestors well when danger was immediate and physical, but creates unnecessary suffering when applied to modern psychological situations. Consider how often you step on metaphorical eggplants in the dark. Your friend doesn't return your text immediately, and you assume you've offended them. A colleague seems distant in a meeting, and you convince yourself they're angry about your presentation. Your partner comes home quieter than usual, and you imagine relationship problems that may exist only in your worried mind. Each scenario follows the same pattern: ambiguous sensory input, followed by mental interpretation, followed by emotional reaction to the interpretation rather than the actual event. We suffer not from what happens, but from what we think about what happens. Zen, Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The monk had become an expert in following rules, but a beginner in seeing clearly. His expertise actually became a limitation when it caused him to jump to conclusions based on preconceptions. This story invites us to examine our tendency toward premature interpretation. How often do we create our own nightmares by assuming the worst about ambiguous situations? How much daily stress comes from responding to imagined scenarios rather than actual circumstances? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable ambiguities of human interaction, can you remember the monk and the eggplant? When your mind begins constructing stories about unclear situations, can you step back and ask, what do I actually know for certain, and what am I adding through interpretation? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, doubt everything, find your own light. The monk's awakening came not from following external rules more perfectly, but from discovering the clarity that was always available within him. Our next story reveals the subtle poison of habitual negativity and the freedom found in contentment. This is the lesson of the monastery and the monk who never stopped complaining. In a remote mountain monastery known for its strict discipline and profound silence, a community of monks devoted themselves to deep spiritual practice. The monastery followed an ancient vow of silence, understanding that constant talking often distracts the mind from inner contemplation and genuine insight. For years at a time, the monks would practice in complete quiet, finding peace in the absence of unnecessary words. However, this particular monastery had one unusual tradition. Every 10 years, each monk was permitted to speak exactly 2 words to the head monk. This brief allowance acknowledged that sometimes practical concerns or spiritual insights might need to be communicated, while still maintaining the essential discipline of silence that supported their contemplative practice. One young monk entered this monastery with sincere intentions and dedicated himself to the demanding schedule of meditation, work, and study. But from the very beginning, he struggled with dissatisfaction. The simple accommodations felt uncomfortable, the plain food seemed inadequate, and the rigorous schedule challenged his preferences at every turn. After his first 10 years of practice, he went to the head monk for his permitted communication. The elder looked at him with kind, expectant eyes, ready to hear whatever wisdom or insight the decade of silent practice might have produced. "Bed hard," the monk said, using his 2 precious words to express his primary complaint about the sleeping arrangements. "I see," the head monk replied gently, making note of the comment, but offering no judgment or solution. The monk returned to his silent practice, but his dissatisfaction only seemed to deepen over the next decade. Instead of using the years to cultivate acceptance and inner peace, he spent his time dwelling on various discomforts and inadequacies he perceived in the monastery's provisions. His meditation became increasingly agitated as his mind rehearsed complaints he couldn't voice. When his second opportunity to speak arrived after another 10 years, he again approached the head monk. The elder greeted him with the same patient attention, curious to see how 2 more decades of practice might have influenced the monk's perspective. "Food stinks," the monk declared, using his allocated words to express his ongoing dissatisfaction with the simple vegetarian meals provided by the community. "I see," the head monk responded with unchanged equanimity, observing this second expression of complaint without surprise or criticism. Another 10 years passed, during which the monk's internal negativity continued to grow. Instead of finding freedom through spiritual practice, he had used 3 decades to perfect the art of mental complaining. His silent years were filled not with peace and insight, but with constant internal criticism of his circumstances. When his third opportunity for speech arrived, the monk appeared before the head monk with obvious agitation. 3 decades of accumulated dissatisfaction had finally reached its breaking point. "I quit," he announced emphatically, using his 2 words to express his ultimate decision to abandon the path he had never truly embraced. The head monk looked at him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Well, I can see why," he replied compassionately. "All you've ever done is complain." The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching reveals how the monk's 30 years of practice had actually reinforced the very patterns that caused his suffering rather than dissolving them. Why do we sometimes use spiritual practice to perfect our dissatisfaction rather than transcend it? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to bring our habitual mental patterns into any environment, then blame external circumstances for our internal states. The monk never truly engaged with the practice. He simply endured it while maintaining his resistance. The monastery's conditions weren't the source of the monk's suffering. His attitude toward those conditions was. Countless other monks had found peace, insight, and profound contentment in the exact same circumstances. The difference lay not in what they experienced, but in how they related to their experience. Consider your own patterns of complaint and dissatisfaction. How much of your mental energy goes toward rehearsing grievances about circumstances you cannot change? The monk spent 30 years of precious life focused on bed hardness and food quality, instead of using those same years to develop inner freedom. This story also reveals the cumulative power of our mental habits. Each day, the monk chose complaint over acceptance. He strengthened neural pathways of dissatisfaction. Over 3 decades, these patterns became so ingrained that leaving seemed like the only option, when in reality, changing his perspective had always been available. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The monk's tragedy was his failure to recognize that his dissatisfaction was impermanent and changeable. Instead of working with his resistance, he fed it daily for 30 years until it consumed his entire spiritual journey. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The monk's 6 words over 30 years, all complaints, brought no peace to himself or others. Meanwhile, monks who used their practice to cultivate gratitude and acceptance found profound tranquility in the same conditions. Look deeply at your own relationship with current challenges. Where are you spending years complaining about circumstances that could be transformed through a shift in perspective? What would change if you used the same mental energy currently devoted to dissatisfaction to cultivate acceptance and inner peace? Tonight, as you notice the inevitable discomforts and imperfections of daily life, can you remember the monk's wasted decades? Can you choose gratitude over complaint, acceptance over resistance, understanding that your response to circumstances shapes your experience far more than the circumstances themselves? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The monastery offered every monk the same opportunity for peace and awakening. Some found it, others did not. Not because of external conditions, but because of the quality of attention they brought to those conditions. In every moment, we face the same choice the monk faced daily: to practice complaining or to practice contentment. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. Master Hakuin, Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death? Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. Who are you to ask such a question? He inquired calmly. I am a samurai, Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle. Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. You, a soldier, he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility? The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. So, you have a sword, Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance. Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. Here, open the gates of hell! The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushige sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master, his anger transformed into profound gratitude. Here open the gates of paradise, Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushige's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get. So I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents. The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen Master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace. responding to taking with giving and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the two towns. In a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, a wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, two different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. "It was dreadful," he said with obvious bitterness. "Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate, the shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore." The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. "This town is very much the same," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea stall. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said cheerfully. "What's it like?" The master regarded this second visitor with the same careful attention he had given the first, again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. "What was your old town like?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. "It was wonderful," he said with obvious fondness. "Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name. And there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities." The master smiled knowingly. "This town is very much the same," he told the second man. "I think you will like it here very much." The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here, we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences, not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere, The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter, or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are." We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The Master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often, when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstances we encounter. Let us now explore a story about acceptance, natural cycles, and what true prosperity means. This is the teaching of the rich man and the Master's blessing. A wealthy merchant had built a vast fortune through years of shrewd business dealings and careful investments. His family owned multiple properties, controlled trade routes, and wielded considerable influence throughout the region. As he aged, the merchant became increasingly concerned about ensuring his family's continued prosperity long after his death. Having heard of a renowned Zen master whose wisdom was said to transcend ordinary understanding, the merchant decided to commission something special. He approached the master with a request that seemed both generous and practical. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully while displaying his finest robes and jewelry, "I would like to commission you to write something profound that will encourage the prosperity of my family for generations to come. Something that my descendants can treasure and draw inspiration from long after I am gone. Money is no object. I simply want the most powerful blessing you can provide." The master listened quietly to this request, observing the merchant's obvious wealth and the sincere concern he felt for his family's future. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded his agreement and asked for a large piece of the finest paper. The merchant watched eagerly as the master prepared his brush and ink with ceremonial care. He expected elaborate calligraphy, perhaps ancient wisdom about accumulating wealth, or powerful mantras that would ensure his family's continued success in business and life. The master's reputation suggested that whatever he wrote would be both beautiful and profound. With simple, elegant strokes, the master wrote just 7 words. Father dies, son dies, grandson dies. When the merchant read what had been written, his face flushed red with anger and disbelief. This was not at all what he had expected or requested. "Master!" he exclaimed, his voice rising with indignation. "I asked you to write something that would bring happiness and prosperity to my family for generations. Instead, you give me this depressing message about death. Why do you give me something so depressing like this?" The master looked at him with calm, compassionate eyes and began to explain the deeper meaning behind what might appear to be a morbid prediction. "Consider carefully what I have written," the master said gently. "If your son should die before you, this would bring unbearable grief to your family. Parents are not meant to outlive their children. Such loss creates a wound that never fully heals. If your grandson should die before your son, this too would bring tremendous sorrow to your family and disrupt the natural flow of life." The merchant began to listen more carefully, sensing there was something deeper in the master's words than he had initially understood. "But if your family continues, generation after generation, with each death occurring in the natural order I have described, this represents the ideal course of life. This is the pattern that brings the least suffering and the greatest harmony. This natural succession, where each generation has time to live fully before passing responsibility to the next, is true happiness and genuine prosperity. As the Buddha taught, of all things, impermanence is the most sacred. This ancient wisdom illuminates why accepting the natural order of life and death creates more genuine peace than any accumulation of material wealth ever could. Why do we resist the fundamental reality that all things, including our own lives and those of our loved ones, are temporary? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from fighting against impermanence rather than finding peace within its natural rhythms. The merchant's initial understanding of prosperity was limited to material accumulation, wealth, property, and influence that could be passed down through generations. But the master pointed to a deeper form of prosperity, the blessing of a family that experiences life and death in harmony with natural order rather than in tragic disruption of it. Consider how different our relationship to mortality becomes when we see death not as failure or tragedy, but as the natural conclusion of a life fully lived. The master's blessing wasn't morbid. It was recognition that the greatest gift we can wish for our families is that each generation has the opportunity to live completely before making way for the next. This teaching also reveals the limitation of trying to control the future through accumulation of resources. The merchant wanted to ensure his family's prosperity through external means, but the master suggested that true prosperity comes from accepting life's fundamental conditions rather than attempting to transcend them. In our modern context, we often measure family success by material legacy, the wealth we leave behind, the properties we pass down, the financial security we provide. But how often do we consider the emotional and spiritual legacy of a family that understands and accepts life's natural rhythms? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching reminds us that even while we work diligently to create good conditions for ourselves and our loved ones, the ultimate prosperity comes from understanding and accepting the temporary nature of all achievements. Look deeply at your own hopes and fears for your family's future. How much energy goes toward trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond our control? What would it mean to wish for your loved ones not immunity from life's natural processes, but wisdom and acceptance in meeting them? The master's blessing contains a profound recognition. The alternative to natural order is not preservation, but tragedy. By wishing for the normal sequence of generational transition, he was wishing for the absence of the premature deaths and disrupted cycles that create the deepest forms of suffering. Tonight, as you consider what you most hope for your family and loved ones, can you remember the master's wisdom? Can you see that the greatest blessing might not be the avoidance of mortality, but the grace to experience it in harmony with natural order? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The master's 7 words brought the merchant face to face with the ultimate reality that no amount of wealth can change: our participation in the endless cycle of birth, life, and death that characterizes all existence. True prosperity lies not in escaping this cycle, but in dancing gracefully within it. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances. A rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols, rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions, each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a serene mountain lake, a young student sat dejected on the temple steps as the sun began its descent toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the profound teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake, where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. "I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world." "You can," the teacher said simply. "How?" asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. "I couldn't even memorize the basic sutras. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters." The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. "Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it?" "Yes," the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. "Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the apex of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its bow?" The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. "Sort of." "Squint," said the teacher patiently. "That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven. The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. "Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father?" asked the boy, hope beginning to kindle in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple authenticity of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal credentials or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to external validation and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a podium, a title, or a certificate, when in reality, the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the integrity of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural transmission that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be illuminating paths you've never imagined. Our next story reveals the difference between knowledge and true awareness. This is the tale of the teacher who thought he had arrived. After a decade of intensive training under various masters, studying countless texts, and dedicating himself wholly to Zen practice, a monk named Tenno finally achieved what he had long sought: recognition as a qualified teacher. His understanding of Buddhist philosophy was profound. His meditation practice was deep and stable, and his ability to guide others had been tested and approved. He received the formal acknowledgement that he was ready to teach the Dharma and help others along the path of awakening. Proud of his accomplishment and eager to learn from one of the most renowned masters of his time, Tenno decided to visit the famous Zen master Nan-in. The older teacher's reputation for wisdom and insight was legendary throughout the region, and Tenno looked forward to engaging in deep Dharma discussions and perhaps receiving some final polishing of his understanding. It was a rainy day when Tenno made his pilgrimage to Nanin's temple. The roads were muddy and slippery, puddles reflected the grey sky, and the steady rainfall required him to carry an umbrella to stay dry. When he reached the temple, he carefully removed his wooden clogs and placed them on the covered porch along with his umbrella, just as custom dictated. He arranged his outer robes, composed himself properly, and entered the temple to meet the great master. Nan-in received him graciously, bowing with the respect due to a fellow teacher while maintaining the dignity of his greater experience. They sat together in the simple receiving room, and Tenno expected their conversation to focus on sophisticated points of doctrine, subtle aspects of meditation technique, or perhaps the challenges of guiding students. Instead, after the initial pleasantries, Nanin asked what seemed like an absurdly mundane question. "I noticed you left your wooden clogs and umbrella on the porch when you entered. Tell me, did you place your umbrella to the left of your shoes or to the right?" Tenno was caught completely off guard. Of all the profound topics they could discuss, why was this renowned master asking about such a trivial detail? He tried to recall the moment he had arranged his belongings, but realized with growing dismay that he had no idea. He had been so focused on the importance of this meeting, so preoccupied with the impressive conversation he expected to have, that he had performed the simple act of arranging his belongings in complete unconsciousness. I don't know," Tenno admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment of confession, the full implications of his ignorance became clear to him. Here he was, a certified teacher of mindfulness and awareness, and he couldn't even remember a simple action he had performed just minutes earlier. Nanin smiled with infinite compassion, not mockery. "Then you have not yet attained full awareness," he said gently. "Someone who is truly awake pays complete attention to every moment, every action, every detail of experience. The way you arrange your belongings reflects the same quality of attention you bring to meditation, to teaching, to all of life." In that instant, Tenno's pride in his accomplishments crumbled, replaced by a humbling recognition of how much deeper his practice needed to go. He understood that true awareness isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a quality of attention that must be cultivated and maintained in every single moment, in the most ordinary activities as well as the most exalted spiritual practices. Without hesitation, Tenno requested to become Nanin's student. For the next 10 years, he studied under the master's guidance, learning to bring the same quality of conscious attention to placing his shoes that he brought to formal meditation, to treat the arrangement of an umbrella with the same reverence he showed to sacred texts. When he finally left Nanin's temple, he was a completely different kind of teacher, one who understood that enlightenment is not a destination, but a way of traveling, not an achievement, but a continuous practice of complete presence. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true spiritual development is measured not by our peak experiences, but by the quality of attention we bring to ordinary moments. Why do we assume that enlightenment exists only in special circumstances, formal practices, or elevated states of consciousness? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is found precisely in our ability to be fully present for whatever is actually happening, whether it's sitting in meditation or simply placing an umbrella beside our shoes. Tenno's mistake was common among spiritual practitioners. He had developed the ability to be mindful during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet learned to extend that same quality of awareness to everyday activities. He could be present while sitting in meditation, but unconscious while performing simple tasks. This split between spiritual activities and ordinary activities is one of the most subtle traps on the path of awakening. We imagine that consciousness is something we turn on during meditation and turn off during mundane tasks. But true practice integrates awareness into every aspect of life. Consider your own daily routine. How present are you while brushing your teeth, making coffee, or putting on your shoes? Do you perform these activities with the same quality of attention you might bring to more important tasks? The gap between formal practice and informal practice often reveals where our awareness needs to deepen. Zen Master Dogen taught, practice and enlightenment are one. This means that the quality of consciousness we cultivate in any moment is both the path and the destination. There's no separation between developing awareness and being aware. Every moment offers a complete opportunity for awakening. Nanin's question wasn't about umbrellas and shoes. It was about whether Tenno's spiritual development had penetrated into the cellular level of his daily existence. Could he maintain the same presence while performing unconscious habits that he brought to conscious spiritual practice? The Buddha said, mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those who are mindful do not die. Those who are heedless are as if dead already. True aliveness is found in complete presence, and complete presence can be cultivated in any activity, no matter how simple or mundane. Look deeply at your own relationship between formal practice and daily life. Where do you treat certain activities as worthy of attention, while others are performed on autopilot? This isn't about becoming obsessively focused on every tiny detail, but about recognizing that the same capacity for presence that serves us in meditation can transform every aspect of our lives. The paradox is that the most ordinary moments often offer the greatest opportunities for awakening. When we're sitting in formal meditation, we expect to be mindful. But when we're simply arranging our belongings or performing routine tasks, we have a chance to discover whether our practice has truly taken root or remains confined to special circumstances. In Zen temples, students are taught that washing dishes is as sacred as chanting sutras, that sweeping floors is as important as studying philosophy. This isn't because these activities are inherently special, but because the quality of consciousness we bring to any activity determines its spiritual value. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, washing dishes is not only a way to have clean dishes. Washing dishes is also a way to live fully in each moment. This points to the fundamental teaching that Nanin was offering Tenno. Every action is an opportunity to practice complete presence. The master's question revealed that Tenno's decade of training had developed his capacity for awareness during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet integrated that awareness into the seamless flow of daily life. He could be conscious when he intended to be conscious, but he hadn't yet learned to make consciousness his default state. This integration is what distinguishes genuine spiritual maturity from mere spiritual knowledge. It's relatively easy to be mindful when we remember to be mindful. The deeper practice is developing the kind of natural awareness that operates whether we're thinking about it or not. Tonight, as you perform the simple actions that end your day, brushing your teeth, changing clothes, arranging items for tomorrow, can you bring the same quality of attention you might give to formal meditation? Can you discover whether your spiritual practice has penetrated into the unconscious habits that make up so much of daily life? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, every moment is a teacher and every place is a classroom. The umbrella beside the shoes was Tenno's teacher that day, revealing exactly where his practice needed to deepen. Sometimes the most profound lessons come disguised as the most ordinary questions, asked by masters wise enough to see that true awakening is found not in transcending the mundane, but in discovering the sacred hidden within it. As our time of shared reflection draws to a quiet end, take a moment to notice the stillness that has settled over you. This tranquility you feel is not a fleeting visitor, but a fundamental part of your own awareness, a quiet space you can return to long after these words have faded. The calm you've cultivated tonight is a testament to your own capacity for balance, a capacity that resides within you, always present and patiently waiting. The Buddha wisely taught, "Those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace." Consider this simple but profound truth. The eye-opening stories we have shared tonight were not just tales of monks and masters. They were mirrors reflecting the ease that comes when we let go of our grievances and release our tight hold on outcomes. They have shown, in myriad ways, that a quiet mind is not an elusive goal, but the natural state that emerges when we cease struggling with what is. The clarity you've touched is born from this gentle release. As you drift towards sleep, let this understanding permeate your being. The lessons from these Zen teachings are now a part of your inner landscape. Even if the mind wanders or old tensions reappear, the seeds of mindfulness planted tonight have taken root. They are a source of strength you can draw upon any time, a quiet anchor in the midst of life's inevitable currents. This practice is not about achieving a perfect state, but about returning again and again to the present moment with kindness and attention. Know that the wisdom you have felt is not confined to ancient texts or distant monasteries. It is woven into the very fabric of your breath and the steady rhythm of your heart. It is the simple, honest awareness you have practiced here tonight. As you transition from this space of deep rest into the activities of your day tomorrow, carry this settledness with you. Let the echo of these stories remind you that peace is always accessible, a quiet strength to guide you through moments of both challenge and joy. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well